Hi, I'm Janice Switlo. I want to bring your attention today to the conversion of collective assets into private holdings that's well underway and is serving as a tool to undermine Indigenous communities. And I guess an extreme example is when I review the financials of a band, and in the past 2 years I see $162+ million has been transferred out of trust funds, both capital and revenue trust funds. And the people say, hey, we're broke. We don't know where that money's gone. We don't see anything for it. No one's informed us. We just don't know, and no one seems to be able to provide any information on this, except, for example, in that case, a former counselor saying, actually, if you go back 5 years, it's probably closer to $500 million that's been transferred out. These monies that are in trust accounts, the revenue and the capital, these are collective assets. These are not assets with which individuals can incorporate companies, transfer the assets into, and then own them through a corporate structure. It's not like, Apple founder using his own money in his parents' garage to get, his company up and going. These are not individuals that are creating companies with their own assets. What they're doing is converting band assets, which are collective assets, which are imbued in a trust. Those trust monies are held in Ottawa, and they are to be released only upon certain kinds of events. Now, usually, the triggering event is a band council resolution saying, we want these funds and we want to use it for this purpose. And as the fiduciary, the trustee says, okay, that meets with, a benefit to the community as a whole. Something significant would require a vote of the community to evidence that, yes, this is something we want. This is someplace we want to put our collective assets to use, like a community center, something of that nature. But that's not happening. The federal government is using this excuse of, we can't be paternalistic. This is self-government in action. If they ask for it, we'll just give it. And we absolve our hands of it. That's not what a fiduciary does. And why, of course, are they doing this? Because the less money there is, the more desperate the community becomes, the easier it is to put in place a framework kind of process that says, hey, we never owned anything, we don't have anything, just please give us some money so we can function and pay the salaries, primarily of staff, for example. And this is an example of, where is the check and balance to prevent unlawful taking and conversion? Instead of the federal government serving to protect, they're saying, we don't want to be called paternalistic and we don't want to interfere, so we'll just hand over the money. They're actually complicit in this conversion of public assets into individual holdings. Because what happens is that money is siphoned off. It's gone somewhere. That's a heck of a lot of money for that one community. $162 million that I eyeballed, never mind $500 million. Every person in that community should have a new house, should have all the education funding they need. It could go on, healthcare, etc., mental health care. They're not getting any of that. There's nothing to show for it. The responsibility remains with the federal government to ensure that if they're releasing that kind of money, that there's checks and balances and security as to where it will actually be used and it will actually get there. And when individuals call upon the federal government and say, hey, what happened? Because our chief and council won't tell us. Some of our councillors don't have a clue because they weren't even involved in any meeting for the BCR. It was just run around and signed by a couple of people to form a quorum, which is completely unlawful, by the way. And the money's gone. It's off in the Cayman Islands somewhere. I know one chief that used to be where he would put his money. Now, not to say every chief is doing this, but there are some serious examples of some huge quantities of money that's missing. And instead of the federal government running by these things, running it by the Crown lawyers who could advise on how to ensure accountability for ensuring proper application of such emptying the counts out completely, right? And this isn't just taking a bit of a drawdown. This is emptying them out completely, consistently, with nothing to show for it, with no accountability, and the people desperate and not knowing. What happens when you convert these collective assets into private holdings? You don't need to run for chief and council anymore because your name is on the document as the main director, chief executive officers. You control the money. These assets now become private holdings in a private company, which you're in control of. That's not right. That's not lawful. And why should Canadians, for example, have to continue to see an example of that kind of community not getting what they need, desperately needing finances to solve community needs? Instead, an individual has 162 million parked somewhere, or paid off different suppliers or contractors. How these monies get distributed, it's anyone's guess. Who can afford for forensic audits? Who's doing that kind of tracing? Canada's saying, you asked for it, we gave it to you, it's your problem, it's self-government. That's not good enough. Canada the Crown is under a duty to protect. And the Crown governments are responsible for fulfilling that obligation. And the Crown lawyers need to be involved to ensure that whatever Indian Affairs is doing, whatever they're called now, that they're not undermining communities, but rather facilitating and helping and meeting the proper needs of the community. Thank you for your time.